Look into my eyes. Your soul is stained by the blood of the innocent. Feel their pain.
This issue starts with Dan doing his best Hamlet while talking to Ghost Rider, asking the important question of why him. The Ghost Rider responds,
Why you? There is no you, Dan. There is just us. We're inseparable. We need each other.
Dan doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want any of this. Ghosty, or the motorcycle, all they have brought him is sorrow and pain. The writer asks him if he thinks either of them really had a choice. He tells him there is a greater force at work here. He brings up the very important point to Dan. He didn't bring the sorrow and pain into Dan's life. It was already there, and Dan needed him to deal with it. That night, in the junkyard, when he found that motorcycle and touched that gas cap with his blood-soaked hands, it was at that moment that the Ghost Rider came to him. If he hadn't, Barb surely would have died that very night. Dan just argues that she died anyways, that the writer didn't help her. The writer answers back that Dan didn't let him. He fought and resisted the transformation. He keeps trying to run from the writer, but he doesn't see that they are one, and he can't hide from this forever. Never! Dan shouts. He sees people in the distance. He thinks maybe they can help him get rid of the writer. The writer tells him that he is being foolish. Sure, they can help rid him of the writer. He warns that they will take much more if he lets them. The writer pleads with Dan to stay away from them. Dan tells him begging isn't very becoming of the writer. As he runs towards them, he shouts for them to help him. As we get closer to see, it appears to be a man and a woman getting married by a priest. The woman glances towards Dan. She is in tears. It's Barbara. You're still alive? Dan shouts. God damn! The man she is apparently marrying turns towards Dan. It's Blackout. He is annoyed that Dan is interrupting him again. Can't Dan see the man is trying to marry his sister?
Now that's fucked up.
The man marrying the two is of course Deathwatch, because why wouldn't it be? And Dan's worst nightmare. Deathwatch states the typical, if anyone doesn't want these two to wed, say it now or forever hold your spiel. He killed her, Dan shouts. And I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty good argument, I'd say. Blackout doesn't even deny it. He states, That's right, Denny, and I'll keep doing it so every night of your life. Her blood will be in my mouth and on your hands, and I'll keep coming. He says all this basically as retribution for what Dan and the writer did to his face. He does this in hopes Dan will be too afraid to even talk to anyone, let alone get close to anyone for fear that they will be killed by Blackout. Ghosty rides up next to Dan on their bike, asking him to let the writer help him, stating they can only stop him and all like him if he joins the writer. A man in the distance tells Dan to listen to the writer. Dad? I'll join you, demon, but on my terms. Dan and the writer merge together, but unlike normal, it's half Ghosty, half Dan Man. Dan is like, I want some control from now on. Blackout mocks this, which is super rude, because that means he was dropping some ease on their conversation.
I ain't been dropping no eaves, sir, honest.
Blackout tells the two that he is the master of both their fates. He does bring up an interesting and unfortunate point. All they can do is react and avenge. But what vengeance does a bloodied corpse truly desire? He says all they can really do is provide the next victims. That part's kinda bullshit. He shouts they can't stop him because they are one of him. As they fall to their doom, Dan abruptly wakes up. He is on the front room couch. His mom is sitting in the chair. She is concerned. He tells her it's nothing. She says this isn't the first nightmare he has had since Barb passed, and that he should talk to Father McDonald. He might be able to help. Dan responds that she didn't pass, she was murdered, and her murder is still out there. She presses him a bit, telling him he should really go see Father, when she is interrupted with him just saying he is going out to Stacy's and don't wait up. He is still blaming the motorcycle, saying if it hadn't come into his life, everything would be alright and Barb would still be alive. I distinctly remember it happening a lot differently than Dan. but we will talk about that more later. Elsewhere, the Cypress Hills Community Action Group. All the neighboring communities are meeting together on behalf of the recent violence and death that has been plaguing the neighborhoods, and that they come together to discuss solutions. One solution being hiring an organization that will combat the problem. Miss Mayer and her team are quite expensive though, but their results are impressive. The leader of the committee, Mr. Crane, asks when they could start. She says right away, but she does come with the stipulation that her team will not be interfered with and they will handle the problem on their terms. One man in the committee questions all this with how much firepower they will be carrying, apparently more than the police and at such a steep price. She states their price and terms are non-negotiable. You came to us because you had a problem and we can solve your problems on our terms. One woman scolds the man, saying, "How can you quibble over money?" This woman, who is very concerned over the children, is Pauline's mother. Remember Pauline? The member of the Cypress Pool Jokers, who originally took the case with the canisters in the first issue, and then decided they should hide them, and then was questioned by the police, then kidnapped by Death Watch, and Blackout, and then dragged around by Blackout to find the last case. Then, after all that, she was randomly grabbed by a mysterious figure in issue 3. She being missing has been brought up a few times since, but we still don't know where she is. And to be honest, I'm going through these issues for the first time in over 10 years, so I don't even remember what happened to her. So I'm actually quite intrigued and I'm hoping to find out myself. I'm also a little worried. Anyways, Pauline's mother says maybe Miss Meager and her team can help find Pauline. 10 minutes later, Miss Meager walks up to a van and tells the mysterious people inside that they have a go and to radio HEART. The acronym HEART, it stands for something apparently, and they are starting tonight. They will be tracking down the Ghost Rider. Elsewhere, we find Dan and Stacy on a walk. Stacy pleased that Dan came out with her tonight and really glad he gave up the motorcycle. She asks what made him decide to give it away. Too many bad memories. He says, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He says they should grab a paper and see the movie. They walk up to a blind man named Mr. Larson, who runs a newspaper stand with his seeing eye dog. Mr. Larson seems to know Dan. Also, the doggy is named Georgie, and he's a good boy. They are closing up shop a little early tonight. Apparently business has been slow since people haven't been out and about too much lately on account of all the murders and disappearances. Again, I ask, who the hell would want to live in New York City in the Marvel Universe? Mr. Larson tells Dan and Stacy to be careful. They tell him to do the same and are off. And of course, the first thing Stacy reads in the newspaper, a girl was murdered last night outside the restaurant that they ate at on the same night. Her throat was ripped out. Sound familiar? We cut to Mr. Larson and the adorable Georgie closing up shop, about to head home. Georgie senses something isn't right. He starts growling. Mr. Larson can't tell on account of the fact that he's blind, but the streetlights in the area abruptly go out. We hear Georgie yell and go silent. Mr. Larson is confused. Who's there? Georgie? Where are you? Who's there? What do you want? All we see is blackness, and his glasses fall to the floor. Later, we see Dan and Stacy walking out of Die Hard 2, Die Harder. This is where we learn Dan doesn't have the greatest taste in movies. As good as the first one? Really, Dan? Really? Stacy says the sensible thing, stating she would have preferred to see RoboCop. I completely agree with that statement. Badass movie. Now, Dan decides to take his mother's advice and stop by the church to see Father McDonald. He goes in as Stacy waits outside. He thinks to himself that he was too short with his mother, and this should help make her feel better. He contemplates on exactly what he should say. His life has been pretty unbelievable as of late. He and Father McDonald greet one another. Dan says he just wants to thank him for being there for his mother. Father Mac is surprised. Are you sure that is all, Daniel? He states that Dan's mom has told him about his nightmares, and she thinks that Dan has been punishing himself for Barb's death. He assures him he isn't going to punish him, and that his doors will always be open whenever Dan needs them. Dan and Stacy leave. Or do they? As someone has come back into the church, Father Mac asking, "Is that you, Daniel?" The mysterious person enters the confessional, and Father Mac states he understands and joins him. Let us begin. Suddenly, a hand breaks through, and that's all we see except for the splattering of blood. Later, we see Dan and Ghost Rider climbing a mountain of some sort. Dan asks what they are waiting for. Blackout says, "You can't blame us for all the bloodshed," saying, It's his own doing. Dan freaks out, saying, "No, not my father." Blackout states that Dan's dad is one of them. He made Dan what he is and what he will become. Dan is like, "What do you mean?" Hands rise from the ground, grabbing Dan, pulling him in. As this happens, Blackout tells him to look around. This is his own doing. He's just helping Dan along a bit. Dan's like, "No!" as he again falls into the abyss. He awakes to his mother, who has been trying to wake him. She says it's awful. Dan is like, "What is?" Stacy is there too. They are pointing to the news broadcast. "Oh hey, it's reporter Lin Wee on TV." She reports that both Mr. Larson and Father McDonald have died. Stacy wondering what the hell is going on. They just saw them last night. Dan says he doesn't know what's happening, but he's going to find out. He says this, and he walks towards his dreaded motorcycle. Midnight, Heart Corp. Humans engaging all racial terrorism. Humans engaging all racial terrorism. I honestly think they really just wanted an acronym that spells heart. Heart! It's described as a for-profit organization consisting of highly trained individuals, highly trained in all aspects of combat and warfare, highly trained women.
Nice.
We got Luz Degato, Recon and Electronics, Danica Travani, Marksman, May Lynn, Hand-to-Hand, Recon, Fiona McCormick, Demolition, and Meager Tyler, Field Commander. They don't mention having a medic or a team healer, which is a little ridiculous. Every team should have a medic or a team healer. Just look at stars! Okay, bad example. Moving on. This will be a recon mission, with only Luz and May leading the mission. Their goal is to learn the extent of what the subject can do. The subject being Ghost Rider. They are not to engage the target. We see Dan writing about looking for who could possibly be responsible for all the killings. His gut instinct is that it's Blackout. What do you think? We hear a scream. Dan goes for the gas cap. Here comes the transformation.
The spirit of vengeance rides again.
Though this time towards an unknown enemy. We see a woman being pulled into some bushes. His chain flies in and smacks the assailant.
Run, mortal.
Ghosty is getting angry, and in his anger, he comes to the brink of remembering. But remembering what? The assailant, a mysterious creature, speaks.
"Another of his creatures, one of his slaves. We won't let you take the girl to him, monster."
Ghosty has no idea what this creature is talking about, and he doesn't care. Only vengeance matters. The creature hits the rider. The woman that the Ghost Rider had saved is running away. She says she will get her brother and his gang, and they will take care of these freaks. As she is saying this, she bumps right into the worst possible person she could bump into. He tells her she mustn't race around the dark, dear. You never know what you might run into. Next, all we hear is her scream in the distance. The creature tells Ghosty the girl has gotten away, and that this is one less innocent victim to be mutilated by Mask. He says maybe now they can break his spell on the rider. What the hell is this dude talking about? He wallops Ghosty and sends him flying. He is surprised by the creature's strength, but the rider won't be stopped so easily. He swings his chain towards the creature and binds his wrists together. Gotcha!
Now, creature, give yourself over to me. The spirit of vengeance will have his due tonight. Fight if you will, but I will taste your corrupted soul.
The creature starts asking someone named Alex for help, saying, "This monster has me bound. Stop him before he takes me back to Mask. Again." He starts talking nonsense. I do love this picture though. Suddenly, I am extremely confused as a goop or blob or some kind engulfs the rider.
No, I will not be denied.
The blob slides away, stating their sister has escaped and they have cheated Mask again.
I must go now. It is time, but I will return to this place. Vengeance will be mine tomorrow and forever.
We cut to Heart headquarters. They recorded the fight, now to analyze all the data they have collected on the Ghost Rider and come up with a plan. A plan to kill the Ghost Rider. To be continued. This issue mostly serves as a fallout from what happened in issue 7, as Dan is trying and struggling to deal with what happened to Barbara. He seems to be taking it out on Ghost Rider in a way, as he wants to blame someone and something for what's happened, and he chooses to blame Ghost Rider, when I honestly think he understands and knows that it wasn't the Ghost Rider's fault. He can't help but blame him and everything that's happened. Well, he should just be blaming Blackout. Blackout truly has become a menace since last issue, and it's getting worse as 3 innocent people have died that had nothing to do with anything, just unfortunately ran into Dan. It's really making Blackout to be this truly evil and terrifying villain. And I mean, it's kind of exciting to read because of that. I will say the biggest downfall in this issue is the foreshadowing of Dan's father. I hate to spoil things, but I would rather spoil something that people are looking forward to that lead nowhere, and I will say that the whole Dan's father thing literally goes nowhere. I think he's mentioned in this issue and in the next issue and never mentioned again. So that's kind of unfortunate, but I would rather warn you guys now instead of you having to deal with that later. We got introduced to Heart. I kind of like Heart, kind of not. It's complicated, especially with what happens in the next issue. But yeah, I think the concept is kind of cool. The execution's a little shaky. But in this issue, they're interesting. They seem to be a kind of a credible threat that are about to tackle Ghost Rider. Besides that, there's not much to really talk about until the next issue and how it ends. So we will talk more then. The next issue continues straight off of what happens here, and we get a couple plots finished up and tied up neatly in a bow, so look forward to that, and I will see you next time in Ghost Rider issue 9.